All right, everybody, it's Dr. Marston again. Picking up where we left. I had to take quite a bit of a break here, a couple hours. So I just wanted to pick right back up on where we went. So we were at the fifth of the six hallmark cases in neuropsychology. And this next one is a case of an individual named JP. And JP was when first evaluated by a psychiatrist, was 19 years old and had a lot of uh, criminal problems. He'd been arrested for car theft, um, and um, uh, he um, he had a history of a lot of uh, behavior problems. Now, it's a little um, uh, this is a situation where the initial situation is actually kind of frustrating and kind of upsetting, uh, but it led to some interesting understanding of the effect of the brain and where it was a little problematic was JP had been getting a lot of problems with the law. He had parents who were wealthy, they were lawyers. So basically, they were looking for um, some sort of mitigating factors to help explain why he kept having these troubles. Basically, it looked like they were uh, trying to find something to keep him out of jail. He had been designated as sociopathic, um, but and he had an understanding of right and wrong. Um, but what happened was um, he was shown to have brain damage. So when they did the evaluation, it was for not so great circumstances. Basically, a kid whose parents were rich who were trying to find some way to keep him out of jail. But what they did find in JP's particular case was uh, brain damage that had led to difficulties, what they determined to be difficulties in terms of social learning. And it basically, uh, what was determined is that JP had damage to what is called the prefrontal cortex, which is basically the front of the brain. And this is what they determined led to difficulties in social learning. And so what was determined about uh, JP was that this damage that or the lesions or not the damage uh, that likely occurred, they determined likely occurred prior to birth or just after birth. And this damage to the prefrontal cortex had led to a lot of difficulties in terms of JP's social learning, his social behaviors. So he understood right and wrong, but actually showed impairment in terms of implementing that understanding in any sort of meaningful way. So, really, what JP's case determined was that there really could be this major effect of damage to the prefrontal cortex, which again is the front part of the brain. This damage to the prefrontal cortex could have some major impact on the individual as they get older. Now, HM is the last one. HM is the one that Schwartz talks about in her book. So I won't um, spend much except, again, HM was somebody who had epilepsy, severe epilepsy, and um, and had to have surgery or was determined to be in need of surgery to treat a severe epilepsy. And what was found is when the uh, when the hippocampus was removed, it was determined to have a major impact on his memory. And I'll let you read um, from that. Um, so, what this actually helped to lead to more of an understanding of memory, in that even up until the 50s and 60s, it was thought that memory was sort of distributed throughout the brain. And what HM's case indicated was that even memory was a localized function, who was where a lot of it was centered within the hippocampus region. And like I said, I'll let you read about that because Schwartz talks about it in the book. But again, here is another indication of this idea of localization, that the hippocampus plays a major part in the a major part in memory. Okay, now again, as part of this issue of uh, covering some of the basics here, I'm going to pull up something on my screen here. Now, I can't make this any larger, but I mean, I can read it, so you should be able to read it on your screen. Um, but here's just a general picture of the brain. And this is another article that I'm going to try to share um, uh, within the materials. But we're just looking here at some of the major areas, but what I really wanted to do here was focus on the major lobes of the brain. A lot of the basics of neuropsychology um, talk about, um, focus a lot on the major lobes of the brain. So I wanted to talk about them here. This is the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is responsible for a lot of higher order functioning, problem solving, concentrating, thinking, but also behavior, personality, and mood. So here's the frontal lobe there. Then you've got the temporal lobe. Now look at where the temporal. So um, going sort of well, I guess counterclockwise in this picture. The temporal lobe is here, and that has to deal with hearing, language, and memory. So most of the areas that have to do with hearing, language, and memory are going to be in this lobe. And then going over here, the occipital lobe, vision and perception is back here. Um, and then parietal lobe, sensations, language, perception, body awareness, and attention. So, and then now notice here too. So these are some of the major areas, and you've got different areas here. Now, one thing I want to show you, let me take this down a little bit further here. Um, Now, sometimes uh, pictures of the brain are split just into the four lobes. So what you end up having, sorry, excuse me, I hit the wrong button. Sorry about that. Um, Let me try. Whitish. Oh shoot. Okay. I'm sorry. I hit the wrong button there. I guess that was a YouTube video, and it ended up playing. I'll take it down here, but I'll try not to hit the play button here. Um, so you see here, you've got the um, uh, you see how it's split really into the four areas of the brain. So you've got the frontal. So in this picture, I just wanted to show you, sometimes the brain is really just split into these four areas: the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the occipital lobe, which would be back here. Um, yeah, this is a better picture. Um, Frontal lobe, um, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital. Now, sometimes it's split just into the four areas. Um, so what you'd have here would be the frontal lobe would cover this area and this area. So you see how it's kind of split there. So you'd have, and then the parietal lobe would be, it would just be, so sometimes you get a picture which just these four areas: the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the parietal, uh, lobe. Uh, so a lot of times in the very basics of neuropsychology, you will read about just those four lobes: the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the parietal lobe. Um, let me take you back up here. So really, so sometimes the brain is split just, or at least the uh the main part of the brain, that relates to human behavior. And as you can see here, it's called um, the cerebral cortex. And the cerebral cortex is the outermost layer of the brain, basically. Um, so frontal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, and parietal lobe. And as we go back up here, you see the basics of what each of those lobes cover. Um, the frontal lobe is, as I said, movement and basically higher level functioning. Um, uh, the temporal lobe is hearing language, so senses. Occipital lobe is, well, some areas of sense human language, but the frontal lobe is where higher level functioning is. Temporal lobe is where a lot of the memory functioning is. Occipital lobe is where perceptual material goes. And then the parietal lobe is language and perception. Now you've got different areas that you also see here. Remember I told you about Broca's area? Broca's area is right, just make sure I have it here. Broca's area is right around here. And it is considered to be the area of speech and control. So you can see the picture. You can take a look at this when I send it to you. But no, I just wanted you to get a real understanding of what the different areas of the brain are. And we will make reference to maps like this as we move on throughout the course. Um, but these are the main parts of the brain. And like I said, very often they are split into the four major lobes. But one of the reasons why splitting it into the four lobes doesn't quite work is, notice what you have here. Where's the one in particular? Oh, yeah, notice here, um, um, you've got the temporal lobe, which is said to have hearing, language, and memory. So that's right here. Um, and then the occipital lobe is meant to have vision and perception. And then sort of um, right here, you've got Wernicke's area, which is language. And so it's sort of related to what goes on in the temporal lobe. Um, but it's its own separate area. So there are these other areas, the motor area, the Wernicke's area, and Broca's area that have functions that are different, slightly different from where they're located. Um, Broca's area has to do with speech, but it's located in what is typically considered to be the frontal lobe. So this idea that you can split the brain into just four lobes doesn't really work, because there are other areas that sort of fit in that lobe, but they're different. That's why they're called different. You even can see here where this one strip that has the control of the voluntary movements, and uh, that's next to the parietal lobe, which has to do with sensations and is connected to voluntary movements, but not the same thing. So this is actually more accurate of a description of the different areas of the brain, even though it is still somewhat very basic. Okay, we'll get into that more. I just wanted to give you this picture of what some of the basic areas of the brain are, and we can pick this up more when we meet on Thursday. I will look forward to seeing you then. Oh, I sort of slumped down my seat there. Sorry. I will look forward to seeing you then.